Hey everyone, in this video we're going to take a look at the second story from chapter 40 of the Road to Latin textbook called Mucio II. So we're continuing the story of Gaius Mucius, one of these early heroes of Rome, right? We have Lars Porsena, the Etruscans besieging the city, all these things we've been talking about. We're going to continue that story and finish off, and you'll see why he's remembered as one, a hero, and why he gets the nickname Scaevola. Now, before we dive too far into it, like I always tell you in these videos, the first thing you should do is make sure you feel really comfortable about the vocab. Now, since this is the second story from chapter 40, I'm assuming you've already done it, but in case you need a refresher, always go take a look at the vocab for the chapter, practice it, and just make sure you have a really solid handle on it, because it's really hard to translate the story if you just don't know what the words mean. And if you need help with that, feel free to check out Nova Latin. You can find it there. There's Quizlets, different things you can use to really make sure the vocab's under control. That should always be your first step. The second thing you should do is make sure the grammar is feeling pretty good at this point. So you've already done one story. The beauty of Road to Latin is it shows you the grammar in context of the story. So it's worth looking at the grammar and at least trying to make some sense of it before you read the stories, just so you can see how the grammar works through the context of a story, if that makes sense. For me, I think that's a lot easier than just doing practice problems. So always do that, right? And again, you can find my notes on my website, whatever you need. There's videos, different things like that. In the first video from chapter 40 that I made, I gave you a quick overview of the grammar, but of course you can check out Nova Latin and get the full notes too. The other thing I'd say is, before you dive too far into your translation, read the story aloud, right? If you can find a classmate or anyone to read this to and have them read it back to you, that way you're working on your speaking and your pronunciation when you read it, but also your listening skills. All that is really important. You don't want to shut it off and just translate in your head. Getting that speaking and listening might unlock the language for you, right? It's meant to be spoken. Treat it as the language it is, right? So always do that. Then when you're ready to read, try the read and reread method. You hear me say this a lot because it works, right? You read through the story, you write down any problem areas you have on a list, whether it's vocab, sentences, words, verbs, whatever it might be. Then when you're done with your full read, you come back to your list, you look it over, you try to figure out where you went wrong. If it's vocab, it's really easy. Just look the words up. If it's grammar, it's probably the grammar from this chapter, right? So you can try to unpack it. Maybe you have to look up an old verb form, whatever it is, but try to make sure that you feel really comfortable about it, or with it rather. And then you go back and you read the story again, and you do the same thing. And as you go, every time you read it, your list should get shorter and shorter until it's gone, right? And you can read through the entire thing, start to finish. You understand all of it, or pretty close to all of it, without needing any help at all. That's how you know you're ready to move on. Okay, so if you haven't done that, pause the video, go do it. If you've already done that, use the rest of this video as just a double check to make sure that you're on the right track. Your translation does not have to be exactly like mine. There's always wiggle room. But as long as you're on the right track or pretty close to it, you can feel comfortable that you're ready to move on. Okay? So story starts like this. You have tum si Mucius, gladio armatus ad castra hostium, laetissime et celerime properave. Okay, so remember we were talking about Gaius Mucius. He's going to have the nickname Scaevola. In the previous video, he had just asked the Roman Senate if he could go off and sort of attack the Etruscans on his own because they're under siege. So you have then Gaius Mucius, right? Remember, the C is really a G here in Latin. So then Gaius Mucius, he's described as armatus, which is the participle. So armed, or you could even say having been armed. Gladio, with a sword. That's your ablative. So armed with a sword, he properavit, he hastened ad castra hostium, to the camp of the enemy, and he did it laetissime et celerime. There are superlative adverbs. It means sort of like most happily, right? Very happily, and very quickly, celerime. Both of those are adverbs describing the verb properavit, right? So how he hastened is kind of the idea. Then you have ibi militibus, Etruscis ignotus ambulabat et omnia spectabat. So we start with ibi, there, meaning at the camp. There, he was walking, ambulabat. And he was walking ignotus. Now, this is an interesting way to describe it. It means like unnoticed, right? So nobody noticed him walking around. So unnoticed, he was walking around with the Etruscan soldiers. So militibus Etruscis, right? So since they're all Italian, you can kind of see in the story, it would make sense that as long as he doesn't speak, right? Because he's not speaking Etruscan, he would be speaking Latin, presumably, right? As long as he doesn't speak or say anything, no one would probably notice he's even there, because it's busy, there's a camp, all these people walking around, and all these things. So he's walking around unnoticed by the Etruscan soldiers, and he's spectabat omnia. He's looking at everything, right? So he's watching everything. Okay, so you're just trying to see what's going on. Then you have subito in medis castris duos viros magna auctoritate in cella sedentes videt. So suddenly, videt, he sees, or he saw, right? So he saw in mediis castris, in the middle of the camp, he saw duos viros, two men with magna auctoritate, with great authority, right? Great power. In cella sedentes. So sedentes is your present participle, right? So we're going to translate it as sitting, and it has the es ending because it's describing the duos viros. So you could even translate this as he saw two men sitting in cella on a chair with magna auctoritate, right? With great authority. So he realizes that he has these two important people sitting there, okay? Then you have circum eos, plurimi milites acriter properaba. So around them, circum eos, and the them are the two men sitting. So around them, there were many soldiers, right? So around them there were plurimi milites, many soldiers properabant, they were hastening, right? Acriter means like fiercely, kind of hastening around them. Right, so there's all these sort of fierce-looking soldiers. They're all around these two men, and the idea is that Mucius doesn't know who Lars Porsena is, right? So he's trying to figure out, and he sees there's two men that everyone seems to be running around. Okay, so because he doesn't know who it is, he asks the question. He says, "Uter est Porsena." Right? So uter here means like which one of two is really how you use it. So he's saying which one of these two, est Porsena, is Porsena, right? He doesn't actually know who the king is. And he says, poterone perficere consilia mea, right? So will I be able to, right, to accomplish? So here you have a complementary infinitive. The potero is the future, will I, right, be able. Perficere means to accomplish, consilia mea, my plans. So he says, am I even going to be able to do my plan of killing Lars Porsena, right? He's like, I don't know which one he is, okay? Then you have itaque cogitans ad viros audacissime cucure et gladio virum sibi proximum occide. So cogitans. So here we have thinking, right? So it's describing not the men, it's describing Mucius, right? He's just sitting there thinking, like, what am I supposed to do? Okay. So thinking, he ran very boldly, or most boldly, right? Audacissime, it's describing cucurit. He ran. So he ran at the men, or to the men. Okay, and he with his sword, rather gladio. So with a sword, he occided, he killed the virum, the man, proximum sibi. So proximum means like nearby, and sibi here means to himself. Remember, near takes a dative, right? Because you're near to something. It's one of those special adjectives. So proximum is describing the virum, and sibi is just saying who he was near to. So he killed the man near to him, right? Basically, with his gladio, with his sword. So in the story, Mucius looks, he sees two men sitting there. He's not sure which one it is. So he basically takes a guess at who he thinks Lars Porsena is, and you're going to see he kills the wrong person. Okay. Then you have tumquam calerime fugit. Okay, so then he fled, right? Fugit, he fled as quickly as possible. Quam calerime. Remember, when you have quam plus a superlative, even if it's an adverb, you're saying as something as possible, really. So quam calerime means as quickly as possible. So he kills one of them, and then he runs away. Then you have Juvenus miser, vero scribam non regam aucidera. So the poor young man, right, Juvenus miser, the miserable young man, or the wretched young man, meaning Mucius, he occiderat, he had killed, it's perfect tense, he had killed the scribum, the scribe, non regem, not the king. So truly he had killed the scribe, not the king. So in the story, the men are lining up to see Lars Porsena, right? Obviously he's very important. He has his scribe, right, his trusted scribe next to him, and by accident Mucius kills the scribe. He was aiming for the king, he just didn't know which is which, so he kills the scribe. Okay? Then you have milites juvenum captum ad regem traxerum. So the soldiers dragged, right? So they traxerum, they dragged the juvenum captum, the captured young man, right? It's literally the young man having been captured. It's a perfect passive participle. So the captured man to the king. Okay, so they drag him to Lars Porsena. And you have rex magno per commotus eum superbe rogave. Okay, so he asks him a question, and he says, Cur hoc malum perfecisti, sine causa scribam meum occidisti, right? So he's talking to Mucius, right? And the king, commotus, right? So the king, having been, very much upset, magna per is your adverb, they're the irregular adverb. So very much emotionally moved is really what commotus means, upset. He asked him, superbe, he proudly asked him, right? Arrogantly. He says, hey, I'm really, really mad. And he says, cur hoc malum perficisti. He says, why did you do or perform perficisti hoc malum? This evil deed is really what it means. So it literally means this evil, but you're implying the word deed really there. So he's like, why'd you do this, right? And he says, sine causa, without cause, you killed, occidisti is perfect tense, right? You killed scribam meum. You killed my scribe. So he says, why did you do this, right? You killed my trusted scribe here, and you did it sine causa, without a reason, okay? Then you have si Mucius, sine timore etiam superbius respondet. And he says, regem non scribam humilem occidere volui. Okay, so Gaius Mucius, right, without fear, sine timore, right, without fear, he responded even more proudly. So remember, the king kind of proudly responded or asked superbe, right? Mucius even more, right? So you have the etiam superbius, right? You have the comparative. So even more proudly, he said, right? He's being even more sort of arrogant and proud than the king. And he says, volui occidere. There's your complementary infinitive. Volui means I wanted. It's perfect tense. So I wanted to kill the regem, the king, not the scribam humilem, not the humble or lowly scribe. So he just calls it out. He says, hey, I was aiming for you, buddy, right? He's like, I just didn't know. So he says, I wanted to kill the king, not some lowly little scribe. And he says, id autem perficere non potue, right? So he says, this, meaning killing the king, this I was not able to accomplish, however, right? So autem's the however, non potui, right? I was not able, perficere, to accomplish. She says, I wasn't able to accomplish this. Sed Porsenna, maximis periculis et plurimis insidiis semper circum daberis. So he says, but Porsenna, now Porsenna is vocative because now he realizes who he's talking to. So he talks to the king, right? So he says, but Porsenna, you will always, semper, you will be surrounded, circum daberis, right? There's your future passive. So he says, you will always be surrounded by the maximis, right? By the greatest dangers, pericules, right? By the greatest dangers and the most insidious, the most plots, right? Is kind of what it means. So he says, you're going to be surrounded by great danger and all these plots always, right? All the time. And he says, multi enim juvenes Romani te occidere constituerum. So he says, for many young Roman men, right? Many juvenes Romani, right? There's your Roman men. Many young Roman men decided, or you can even say have decided, to kill you. There's your complementary infinitive with occidere, and te is you, right? So meaning the king. It says, many young men have decided to kill you. So he's saying you're always going to be in danger, and there's always going to be plots kind of swirling around you. Porsenna maxime perterritus respondit, nisi mihi omnia consilia Romanorum statim nauaveris igni consumeris, right? So here's the threat from the king. He says, so you have Porsenna, perterritus maxime, here's your adverb again, maxime, it's irregular. So greatly or very frightened, perterritus is you're frightened there. So greatly frightened, he responded, okay? And he says, unless you will have told, right? Or you will, you will have told, is probably the best way to do it. Naraveris, right? It's future perfect. She says, unless you will have told omnia consilia, all the plans Romanorum of the Romans, mihi, to me, right? So he says, unless you have told to me all the plans of the Romans, statim, immediately. Consumeris, right? You will be consumed, igni, by fire. So again, future perfect happens before future. So you have two different tenses here. So the future perfect, the naraveris, comes first. He says, first, you better tell me, or else I'm going to burn you to death, is kind of the idea. Literally, you will be consumed by fire. Okay? Then you have Mucius responded, right? So Mucius responds. And he says, Civis Romanus multo magis honorum suum quam vitam amat. So he responds and says, a Roman citizen, right, loves amat. He loves his own honor, right? Honorem suum, right? He loves his own honor much more. Multo magis is your much more. So it's a comparison here. So multo is that degree with the ablatives, right? So he's saying much more than life, quam vitam, right? So he says a Roman citizen loves his honor, right? His own honor much more than life, okay? Meaning your threat is not going to do anything to me because I'm not afraid to die. And he says, patria kiwi romano vita multo est carior. Right? So the fatherland, the patria, the country, right, is multo carior, is much dearer. Again, there's your comparison there, and you have the ablative, right, the degree of difference here, right? So much dearer to a Roman citizen, kiwi romano, to a Roman citizen than life. Vita, we're using the ablative to finish off our comparison here. right? So he's saying the country is much more important than life to a Roman citizen. Civis Romanus mortem non timet, right? So a Roman citizen does not fear death, right? So he says, I'm not afraid of dying because I'm doing this for my country, right? So this story is all about what a true Roman is all about. Okay, then you have haec dixit et posuit dextram in igni qui prope in ara erat. So here's the sort of dramatic moment of Gaius Mucius, right? So he said these things. So haec dixit, right? Haec means these. It's really these things. It's that substantive neuter adjective. Okay. So he said these things, and he posuit, he put his dextrum, his right hand, right? So dextra is really a direction, right and left. But here is sort of the noun, it means his right hand. So he put his right hand in igni, in the fire, right? So remember, he got threatened with fire. So in response, he takes his right hand, saying, I don't care about death. And he puts his own right hand in the fire. And it's the fire which, qui is referring to the fire, which was erat prope in ara, which was nearby on the altar, right? So prope there is the nearby. In ara means like on the altar, right? So you want to imagine they have a torch or something burning on the altar. Gaius Mucius looks right at him. He's like, I don't care, right? You're going to threaten me? What do I care? And he sticks his own hand in the fire. Then you have dextra igni consumpta est, right? So his right hand, his dextra, his right hand, consumpta est, was consumed. It's perfect passive. It was consumed igni by the flame or by the fire. Mucius autem statuae similimus se non movit, right? So Mucius, however, similimus means like very similar to a statue. Statua is what he's similar to. Very similar to a statue. Non movit se, did not move himself, right? Did not move his hand is the idea. So Gaius Mucius, again, gets threatened by fire, right? If he doesn't give up his comrades, right? Lars Porsena says, I'm going to burn you to death if you don't tell me what's going on. He's like, what do I care, right? I'm here for the fatherland. I'm here for my country. I'm not afraid of death. And he sticks his own right hand in the fire, right? And burns his own hand off, basically. This is the sort of dramatic and heroic moment of Gaius Mucius, okay? Then you have Porsena, virtutem eos videns etiam plus timoris habebat et magna voce clamavit. Tu es fortis, hostem tam fortem interficere non possum, Dei ipsi mortem talis viri vetant. Okay, so Porsena, seeing his virtue, so the videns there is nominative singular, it's a present participle, right? You can tell by the ns ending. So seeing virtutem eos, his virtue, meaning not his own, right? We would use the reflexive suis if it was talking about Porsena's own virtue. He's talking about someone else here, meaning Mucius's, right? So seeing his virtue, right, his manliness, his toughness, had even more fear. So he habebat, he had etiam plus timoris, right? Even more of fear, right? Even more fear. So he's even more afraid of this guy because he's burning his own hand off, right? And he shouted in a great voice, magna voce, right? So he shouted in a loud or great voice. And he says, tu es fortis, right? You are brave. And he says, non possum, I am not able, interficere, to kill, hostem tam fortem. The tam means such there. So such a brave enemy, such a hostem fortem. He's like, I'm not able to kill such a brave enemy. And he says, Dei ipsi, the gods themselves forbid, vetant, right? There's your forbidding verb. They forbid the mortem, the death of such a man. Talis weary, right, is genitive there. So of such a man. So he says, I can't kill you. You're too brave. And the gods themselves won't let me do this, right? Because you're such a brave person, right? So Mucius instantly becomes famous for this, okay? Then you have sic, si Mucius servatus est quod tam fortis fuit et quod patrium suam amavit. So thus, Gaius Mucius, he was saved, servatus est, right? He was saved because he was so brave, right? Fuit is the was, the perfect tense of essay. Tam fortis, so brave, right? He was so brave, and because he loved, amavit, he loved his patrium, his country. Okay, so this story, again, you can already tell the themes happening here. This is what a true Roman is supposed to be, right? Loving your country more than yourself. That's the story of Gaius Mucius, right? So he's saved because he was so brave and because he loved his country so much. Okay, then you have tum hoc beneficio adductus, regi omnia consilia juvenum Romanorum dixit. Okay. So then, right, because he's been saved. So having been influenced, meaning Gaius Mucius, right? So adductus, having been influenced by such kindness, hoc beneficio, right? By such kindness, he said to the king, right? Dixit regi, right? He said to the king, omnia consilia, all the plans of the Juvenum Romanorum, of the young Romans, right? So he finally tells them, because he's so appreciative, right? They have this mutual respect of each other. And he says, sunt inque trecenti nobiles Juvenes qui te occidere constitueram. So there are, he said, trecenti nobiles Juvenes, so 300 noble youths, you might say, right? Young men, young noble men, who constitueran, who decided or have decided to kill you, right? Te occidere. So he tells them there's 300 young Romans who are going to come after you, okay? And he says, si fortuna alium, right? Si fortuna alium ab hoc facto prohibueret, aliud id libenter temptabit. Okay, so he says if fortune will prevent, right? So there, that's the prohibuere, right? Will prevent, or will have prevented, right? One or another, you might even say, right? Alium, another from this deed, ab hoc facto, right? So if fortune is going to prevent one of them from accomplishing this deed, aliud id libenter temptabit, right? Another, right? That's your aliud. Another will try it gladly, right? Libente, right? Will gladly try it. So he's saying, if you kill one of us, another one is just going to show up because 300 of us have tried this. So he's saying you're always going to be in trouble here. Okay. Tandem unus ex nobis consilia perficia. Okay. So finally, one of the nobles, unus ex nobis, one of us rather, sorry, not one of the nobles, one of us will accomplish the concilia, the plan or the plans, right? So he says, at some point, tandem, one of us is going to accomplish this, right? One of us is going to kill you. And he says, sic demum Roma nostra patia liberabitur. Okay, so thus, or in this way, seek Rome, right? Roma, nostra patria, our fatherland, liberabitur, will be freed. It's future passive. Okay, so in this way, at last, demum, finally, or at last, our fatherland, Rome, will be freed from you, right? Because they're under siege. So he gives this, he tells them the plan, but again, Mucius is kind of threatening, in a way, Porsenna, saying, you better get out of here because someone's going to kill you. Okay. Then we have this final paragraph. And you have tum, Lars Porsenna, his verbis adductus virum fortissimum domum misit. Okay. So then Lars Porsenna, having been influenced, there's adductus again, it's the perfect passive participle. So having been influenced by his verbis, by these words, okay, he misit, he sent the virum fortissimum, the bravest man, right, the bravest young man, domum, home. So he lets Mucius go, right, because he's so, moved and affected by what he's saying. So he's impressed by his bravery. He understands there's a lot of people coming for him, and he sends him home. Okay. Then you have mox cum Romanis pacem confirmavit. So soon he confirmed, or he made, you might even say, or declared, confirmavit, right? Pacem, so he made peace with the Romans, right? Cum Romanis. So after this, he's so freaked out, impressed, everyone to take it, that he actually makes peace. Okay. And you have omnibus suis copiis Roma discessit. So he discessit, he departed with his entire army, right? So omnibus there means all or entire. Suis copiis means like his troops, right? So he departed with all his troops, you might say. Roma there is ablative because it's saying motion away from, so from Rome. So he departed away from Rome with all his troops. Postea populus Romanus propter magnum eus virtutem Mucio cognomen Scaevolam dedit et nomen eus semper laudavit. Okay, so here's the sort of outcome of all his bravery. So afterward, right, the Roman people, the populus Romanus, on account of his great virtue, right, magnum virtutem eius, right, the eius there is talking about Gaius Mucius, right? So on account of his great virtue, they gave the cognomen. Remember, the cognomen is like a nickname, right? So they gave the name to Mucius, right? Mucio there is dative. So they gave to Mucius the name Scaevola, which means lefty in Latin, right? Why do they call him lefty? Because he burned his right hand off. So that nickname is one of like honor, right? Because he was so brave, he burned his right hand, so they call him lefty. And his name, nomen eus, semper laudavit, right? They always praise the Roman people, right? It's a singular, but it's talking about all of them. They always praised his name. So he's famous, right? So Scaevola is such a famous character, and one of the more interesting ones from this early Roman history, or early Roman myths, really, right? The foundings of Rome. He's a symbol of bravery. He's a symbol of a lot of things, but to me, he always represents like the duty that a Roman man is supposed to have to their family, their fatherland, all these things. You're supposed to protect your country because you're protecting your family by doing this. So his bravery is supposed to be an inspiration, and it was for a very long time, right, to the Roman soldiers and people studying this, right? That's how you're supposed to act. He is sort of a definition of virtus, right? Virtue. When you think of it, that's really what he has on display here. Okay. So if you have any questions on any of the grammar here, the translation, put it in the comments below. I'm happy to help. Like I said, if you haven't looked up this myth, I'll put a link below, but you should read about it. You can find it really anywhere, but it's such a great myth to kind of dive into and unpack what it all means. Take a look at it. But again, in terms of the story here, it's the second one. So hopefully you're feeling really comfortable with the grammar that we're getting in chapter 40, which is all about adverbs, right? The degrees of adverbs, including the irregulars. Hopefully that's starting to sink in a little bit. And like I always tell you, the more you practice this and read through it, the easier it's going to get. So you're trying to get to a point where you can read through the story without needing any help at all. That's how you know you're in a really good place. Okay? Good luck with it.